In the heart of a quiet village, where red dust danced in the breeze and goats wandered freely, a little boy named Kanye walked hand in hand with his grandfather. They passed the village square, where a tall statue stood in the sun. But it wasn't a statue of a king, a warrior, or a famous leader. No, it was a statue of a yam. A big, round yam made of bronze, shining in the light. Kanye stopped and tugged on his grandfather's wrapper. "Grandpa," he asked, his eyes wide, "why is there a statue of a yam? Why not a person?" The old man chuckled, his eyes crinkling with warmth. "Ah, Kanye," he said, "that yam is no ordinary yam. It tells the story of a man who had nothing, but gave everything." "Who was he?" Kanye whispered. The grandfather looked up at the sky as if the wind itself might carry the story. He was just a farmer, a man named Okeke. But because of one simple act, he changed this whole village forever. And as the grandfather began to speak, the world around them faded. The market disappeared. The square grew quiet. And slowly, we are taken back in time, to a season of famine. To a time when even one yam could mean life or death. Long ago, the village of Umudim was full of life. Children ran through the fields, their laughter echoing like music. Women sang as they pounded yam. Men told stories under the big irako tree. And every evening, drums played until the stars filled the sky. But all that changed when the rains stopped. First, the streams dried up. Then, the green leaves turned brown. The ground cracked like broken clay. Day after day, the sun burned hotter. Month after month, no rain came. People prayed. They danced. They waited. But still, nothing. Soon, the yam barns stood empty. The cassava fields turned to dust. Even the birds stopped singing. The once joyful village became quiet and still. Children grew thin. Mothers cried soft ly at night. Fathers sat in silence, staring at the sky. The drums of Umudim, once full of rhythm and hope, fell silent. It was the worst famine the village had ever known. And in the middle of it all, in a small mud house near the edge of the village, lived a man named Okeke and his young son Chuka, holding on to the last thing they had left. One yam. Okeke was not a rich man, but he had always been proud of his land. He was a gentle farmer with strong hands, a quiet voice, and kind eyes that had seen both joy and sorrow. Many people in Umudim knew him for his honesty, and for the way he always shared his harvest with those in need. But now, there was nothing left to share. Years ago, Okeke had lost his wife during childbirth. Since then, it had just been him and his son, Chuka, a bright-eyed boy with a curious mind and a brave heart. They had survived many hard seasons together. But this famine was different. Day by day, their food disappeared. First the maize, then the beans, then the plantains, until all that remained was one yam. Okeke had kept it hidden, wrapped in dry leaves and buried in a clay pot beneath the kitchen floor. It was from the last good harvest, a perfect yam he had saved, just in case. Now, that just in case had come. Every morning, Chuka would ask, "Papa, when will it rain?" And Okeke would smile sadly and say, "Soon, my son, soon." But even he no longer believed it. That yam was their only hope, their only food, their last promise of one more day. And Okeke knew, when it was gone, there would be nothing left. The sun was beginning to set when Okeke heard a soft knock at the gate. Tap, tap. He opened the wooden door slowly, and there stood a man he had never seen before. The stranger looked weak and dusty, like he had walked a very long way. His clothes were torn, his lips dry and cracked. His eyes, once full of life, now begged for mercy. "Please," the man whispered, barely able to stand. "I haven't eaten in 3 days. Do you have anything at all?" Okeke stood frozen. Behind him, little Chuka peeked out from the doorway. Chuka's heart beat fast. He gripped his father's hand tightly and whispered, "Papa, we don't have anything. Not even a crumb." Okeke said nothing. His eyes shifted to the clay pot hidden under the floor. He knew what was in it. 1 yam. That's all. He looked back at the stranger. The man was shaking from hunger. His hands were trembling. "Please," the man repeated, "just a bite. Just enough to keep me standing." Okeke's chest ached. He had a choice to make. A terrible choice. Feed his own son, or feed a stranger. Chuka's grip tightened. The boy was scared. But Okeke looked into the stranger's eyes and saw something familiar. Desperation. And though his stomach growled with hunger, something deeper stirred in his heart. He said, "Wait here." Then he walked slowly toward the hidden yam. Okeke knelt down beside the clay pot. He slowly unwrapped the dried leaves around the last yam. It was small, but firm. The skin was rough, but inside it held the promise of life. His hands trembled as he held it. He thought of Chuka's thin arms. He thought of the stranger's sunken eyes. And he thought of the silence in the village, where no one had any food left to give. His heart pulled in 2 directions. Fear whispered, "This is your only chance to survive. Keep it." But compassion whispered louder, "What is life if you close your hand while another man dies?" Okeke sat in silence for a long time. Even the wind held its breath. Finally, he stood. He walked back to the stranger, placed the yam into his hands, and said gently, "It's not much, but it's all I have." The stranger blinked, stunned. His lips quivered. Then he dropped to his knees and began to cry. He clutched the yam like it was gold. He said, thank you," again and again as tears rolled down his cheeks. Chuka stood by the doorway, eyes wide, mouth open. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. That yam was meant for them. Now it was gone. The stranger ate the yam slowly, gratefully, every bite filling him with strength. And when he was done, he looked at Okeke with tears in his eyes. Then, without another word, he turned and walked into the night. No name, no story, just a man who came and vanished like smoke. And inside the small hut, Chuka stood in silence, staring at the empty pot where the yam used to be. That night, the little clay cooking pot stayed cold. There was no fire, no food, no smell of yam boiling. Only silence. Chuka lay on the mat, curled up with his arms around his stomach. His belly ached. His throat was dry. His heart felt even emptier. Across the room, Okeke sat quietly, staring at the dark ceiling. The shadows danced on the mud walls, but his eyes didn't move. Not even once. The next day came, and still no food. The wind blew dust into their yard. A neighbor coughed in the distance. The birds didn't sing. The trees didn't sway. Day after day, their hunger grew. The world felt slower, heavier. Chuka didn't speak at first. But on the 4th day, he finally burst. He stood in front of his father with shaking hands and angry eyes. "Papa," he said, "why did you do it?" Okeke looked at him, tired but calm. "That man was a stranger," Chuka continued. "He had no one. We had each other. You gave away our only food, for nothing." His voice cracked. His face twisted in pain, not just from hunger, but from heartbreak. You chose him over me, over your own blood. Okeke looked away, his lips pressed tightly together, his jaw clenched. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned his face toward the sky, toward the place where rain used to fall, where the stars still watched in silence. And for a long time, no one spoke. One hot morning, just as the village of Umudim had almost given up hope, a strange sound echoed in the distance. Drums, bells, and the soft stomp of hooves. People came out of their huts, blinking against the sunlight. Children climbed onto rocks. Elders leaned on walking sticks. Everyone turned to look down the dusty road. And there they saw it. A grand caravan, unlike anything Umudim had ever seen. Horses with golden cloth tied to their saddles. Drummers in fine robes. Guards with spears that glittered in the sun. And in the middle of it all, on a tall black horse, rode a man dressed in royal blue, wearing a shining necklace of coral and silver. He had bright eyes, a proud smile, and a face that looked strangely familiar. Okeke stepped out of his hut, his eyes squinting at the light. Chuka stood beside him, confused. Then the man dismounted his horse and walked straight to them. "I told you I hadn't eaten in 3 days," he said softly. "But I never told you who I was." Okeke's eyes widened. It was him, the starving man, the stranger, now standing tall, strong, and shining like a king. "I am Prince Afam of the Eastern Hills," the man said. "I left my palace in disguise, searching for true kindness, kindness that lives even in hunger, even in darkness." He turned to the growing crowd and raised his voice. "I came to see if any heart still beat with generosity in these forgotten lands. And I found it in the home of a poor farmer." He looked at Okeke, then at Chuka, and smiled. "You gave me your last yam. Today, I've come to return the gift." Prince Afam clapped his hands once, and the caravan came alive. Men and women began unloading sacks and sacks of yams, fresh and full. Goats and chickens were led forward on ropes, bleating and clucking happily. Bags of seeds, corn, millet, groundnuts, were stacked beside barrels of clean water. A box of shining gold coins was placed at Okeke's feet. Gasps rose from the villagers. Eyes widened. Mouths fell open. Chuka could barely breathe. The prince smiled and said, "For a single yam, this man gave all he had to someone he didn't know." He turned to the crowd. While others locked their doors, he opened his heart. While many waited to be saved, he chose to save. Then he asked, his voice calm but strong, "This man gave his last when he had nothing. What will you give when you have plenty?" The village stood still. Then, slowly, a drumbeat began. 1 drum, then 2, then voices, soft at first, then louder, rising like the wind before a storm. "Oh, Okeke! Heart of gold, hand of hope." Women ululated. Children danced. The elders clapped and lifted their hands. For the first time in many, many moons, the village of Umudim sang again, and the sound of joy rolled through the hills like thunder after a long, dry silence. That day, Okeke's small mud hut was filled, not just with food and treasure, but with laughter, with dancing, and with the sound of life returning. In the days that followed, everything began to change. Crops were planted again. The village square was full of laughter. Drums played each evening. But the biggest change wasn't the food or the gold. It was Okeke. People came to him, not because he was rich now, but because they trusted his heart. He never shouted. He never showed off. He simply listened, helped, and reminded others that a full hand means nothing without a full heart. And young Chuka, he changed too. He no longer saw the yam as something lost, but as a seed that grew into something far greater. He remembered the night he was hungry and angry, and how his father had stayed silent, staring at the stars. Now, he understood. Years later, Chuka became a teacher, not of reading or writing, but of kindness. He would gather children under the big Irako tree and say, "One yam, given in love, can feed 100 souls." The world does not remember the greedy, but it never forgets the generous. And the village of Umudim? It thrived, not just in crops, but in character. Fences grew low, because neighbors trusted each other. Stories grew strong, because children learned them early. And every planting season, the people would say, "Let us plant like Okeke, generous, brave, and full of heart." The story ended, and for a moment, all was quiet. Kanye stood beside his grandfather, still looking up at the tall yam statue in the village square. The bronze surface glowed in the late afternoon sun. It no longer looked strange to him. Now, it looked powerful. He stepped forward and gently placed his small hand on the cool metal. A smile spread across his face. "So that's why we honor a yam," he whispered. His grandfather nodded, his eyes shining. "Not just any yam," he said softly, "but the one that was given away when it was all a man had." Kanye turned to look at him. "And what happened to Okeke and Chuka?" The old man chuckled. "Well," he said, "some say Chuka's children still live here. And every year they give away their first harvest, just like their grandfather did." Kanye's eyes lit up. Then his grandfather looked into the sky, just like Okeke once had, and spoke the final words. "A man's wealth is not in what he keeps, but in what he gives, even if it's just one yam." As the sun dipped behind the hills, a soft wind swept across the farmland. Leaves rustled. Children's laughter echoed nearby. And far off, deep in the village, the drums began to play again. Boom, boom, ba boom. And so the story lives on.